Let's give it.
Welcome to Why Your Corporate IT Needs to Look a Lot More Like Consumer IT by James Duncan.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So, as mentioned, my name's James Duncan. I'm a founder and a partner in a small consultancy firm called Stance, and we sort of deal with organizational change. We help companies and organizations of all shapes, sectors, and sizes really think about how the world is changing them, and as a result, how they need to change. All change is really chaotic, and particularly change that's positive, and having it be comfortable really is as much as you can ask for. And so that's what we try and do. Now, there are probably some of you in the audience who have seen me give talks in the past, and hopefully you already know that you're in for a little bit of a story. But for everyone else, you'll have to forgive me if we meander through my past a little bit before I get to the now. Hopefully, you'll agree with me that it's worth it. So I grew up in a farmhouse in rural Canada. It was about 100 kilometers east of Ottawa and about 100 kilometers west of Montreal. And we were more or less 15 kilometers away from the nearest small village. So really, it was about as rural as it gets. And technology should not have had a big impact on our lives. It seems kind of nuts to think about it now, but for a long time, we had a party line to our house. And some of you might not know what that is, or some of you might know what it is, but many of you won't. I imagine it's most of you. So to a teenager in rural Canada, a party line was about as close to the opposite of a party as you could get. It was essentially a normal landline, and just in case, that's like a mobile phone, only to a place rather than a person. So a normal landline, like you'd have into your house today, but instead of connecting to just your house, it connected to a bunch of others too. And it seems almost unbelievable now, crazy to think of it, but we literally shared our telephone with all of our neighbors. And that meant all it sounds like. It wasn't just that you wanted to use the phone, but your little brother was playing Fortnite on your handset. And it wasn't that your father was waiting to take an important phone call from work. It was more like you wanted to use the phone, but Réjean next door was talking to her cousin Maxime in Laval, and you can use the telephone later when she's done. And then that's how it worked. It's nuts. And that was, in the mid-90s. And our television, another little one, we got by steering an antenna that was on top of a huge mast beside our house, and we would steer it towards the broadcast. So we had this little control box in the living room, and we'd turn the dial, and it would make this massive sound as the antenna slowly swung around until it was pointing more or less in the right direction. And sometimes we'd aim it west towards Ottawa, and sometimes we pointed it east into Montreal. And if the atmospheric conditions were just about right, we'd point it south across the border into Burlington, Vermont. And it's fair to say sometimes it worked. But despite having a color television, the world, even in the 1990s, was presented through this black and white static view. And perhaps that's why when I read in William Gibson's Neuromancer that the sky above the port was the color of the television tuned to a dead channel, it really resonated powerfully with me. I knew precisely what it looked like because that's what I saw on TV most of the time. It was a very familiar looking metaphor. And so instead of TV, I grew up on computers and stories of computers. And one of my favorite stories was a true one called Soul of a New Machine. And that was a book written by a chap named Tracy Kidder. Now, you're all computer people, more or less, I'd imagine. And so you all owe it to yourselves to read this book if you haven't already. There are honestly lessons in it about computing and business that I still use on a daily basis. It's an amazing story. It's fascinating about a guy called Tom West and a team of engineers who worked for him. And they were making a new computer for a company called Data General. And the team that were building it called this computer the Eagle. So when I was about 15 years old, I guess, I did some work for a man who would go and clear out old government buildings. He would pay the government a few $1,000s, and then he would go and empty the building, and he could do whatever he wanted with whatever he found inside. And mostly what he wanted to do was catalog the stuff, organize it, and then sell it. And he wanted me to write a pretty basic, if we're honest, early online shopping cart. And he said he'd give me a small amount of cash, but also that I could get to rummage through everything he had stashed away in his warehouse and choose some stuff that I wanted. And the cash wasn't bad, but for me, the really cool thing was the stuff. He had a huge warehouse and it was full of it. And there were chairs and desks and filing cabinets and all sorts of office paraphernalia. But hidden away in the corner was something that to me was almost priceless. It was an eagle. Well, it actually wasn't an eagle. You see, after the book was published, the Data General marketing team got their hands on it and they renamed it to the Eclipse MV/8000. And perhaps in hindsight, it should be obvious why Data General doesn't exist anymore and why you may not have heard of them. But there you go. But as soon as I saw that big mini computer, it was the only thing I wanted. And to his credit, despite it being a fairly big ticket item, he was as good as his word. He agreed that I could have it, and I made arrangements to collect it as soon as I possibly could. Now, with hindsight, I suppose that being true to your word in his line of work was quite important, because not long after I finished up working for him, he was arrested, charged, and then sentenced for being an international arms dealer, and the office clearing stuff was just a front. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is that I got an eagle in my house, in the back of a friend's truck, and I set it up in our barn, and I tried without success to get it running. And eventually I gave up, and in time my parents sold the farm and we moved away and the eagle didn't come with us. And honestly, it does make me a little bit sad to think of it now, but perhaps that sort of big old rusting hunk of a machine is still sitting there and just melting away in the corner. Anyway, the point of all that is that computing really came from a very different place. At the time, I was a tech-savvy teenager. I was running a startup. I was using frame relay lines and FreeBSD and shelves full of US robotics external modems to resell slip internet access to local people so that I could afford to go online. But because I didn't have a team of people in white lab coats to get that machine running, or keep it running once they did, the eagle was essentially beyond me. My computing knowledge at that time existed through the lens of PC revolution. I could assemble some comparatively inexpensive parts and have myself a working machine, a skill that even today I can exercise. Microsoft were incredibly dominant, and they were about to get even more powerful with Windows 95. And not to discount the importance of free as in speech to a 15-year-old kid, but open source and GNU and FreeBSD gave me a working Unix with a compiler for essentially free as in beer, which was amazing. Now, did I skip a slide there? No, I didn't. Now, the internet was a thing. And there were some of us who thought it was going to be really quite big, but it was still treated as a bit of a novelty. The world of corporate IT was largely disconnected computers doing discrete tasks. And the point of networking was so that you could share files, and it was managed and controlled by the same lab coat types whose help I could have done with to fire up my eagle. And everybody who was anybody in the world at that time, especially my world, laughed at them because we all knew that their soggy mainframe and mini computer model was dead in a world of decentralized PCs. But they still all made decisions about technology, the men in white coats, and they shaped, and that origin shaped how they thought about managing the technology. And frankly, it still shapes how we're managing the technology today. What was happening at that moment, and what has now happened, as this was some years ago, and frankly, we shouldn't still be talking about this, is that in Wardley mapping terms, and I know you all know about Wardley maps after the last week or so, the experience of using computing devices was becoming a commodity. I mean, everybody knows how to do computing now. Even my mum knows how to do it now. But our IT organizations haven't figured that out yet. The way they still operate is shaped by the dudes who fiddled with the eagle in the early 80s. Our organizations, and in fact, most of our industry, act as if users are stupid and you can't trust them, and that even policy and training isn't enough to stop them from being dumb. You have to have technical controls on top of it too. And the truth is that the products our technology organizations buy now would not have looked out of place in that world of Data General. The organizational architectures are the same centralized, stodgy operating models, and the security that we're using is still the equivalent of buying a thicker door for the data basement. It wasn't good enough 10 years ago, and today it stands up even less. But what does a modern, reconsidered IT environment look like? The first thing to do is to liberate the network. So the corporate network has become a behemoth, and it gets in the way of almost everything. Firewalls, DMZs, VPN concentrators, the whole lot of it is nothing but unneeded complexity, and it doesn't do the one thing that we lie to ourselves about it, that it keeps the baddies out. Because if it did keep the baddies out, we had not spent billions of dollars on another class of software that the IT industry has convinced us we need, intrusion detection software. If all that other stuff worked, we would not need it. So the first place to start is the network, and my suggestion is to eliminate it. The corporate network is now the internet, and we probably just cut out a significant percentage of your technology expenditure. Now, of course, to access the internet, we need some sort of computing device. Here, I'd strongly recommend giving people the things they want. Let them have a budget. Let's create a corporate store where they can select the latest and greatest phones, laptops, tablets, etc. Become a reseller if you can get a bit of a discount, but don't sweat it that much if you can't, because the main thing is to make the devices good. Make them the things that people want, the kind of devices they'd buy for their personal lives and homes. You should be able to do that from the savings that you made with the network. The device should just be a pane of glass onto a bunch of SaaS. Use Office 365 or G Suite as your corporate productivity and collaboration software, and give everyone a login to it. And if you choose Office 365, don't give people the applications you have to download and install on the client. Use the web version. We've known for years that people only use like 20% of the features, so I don't even begin to understand why that would actually be controversial. And tell your users that they should store everything on OneDrive or Google Drive or whatever. And if they don't put it out there, if they don't put it on there and they lose the device, they're out of luck. Wrap the devices in an MDM of some sort so that you can wipe it and do a password reset remotely, sure, but don't under any circumstances lock the device down in any other way. And the reason is this. Your corporate service desk has now become the internet. Most people get along with their home computers just fine. And while there are a handful of people left in every company that don't, they're diminishing in numbers all the time. And let's be brutally honest. Most of the time, the reason why they can't solve things for themselves is that the corporate computing experience has deviated significantly from the consumer experience. And that means that advice from the consumer, for the consumer, no longer helps anyone behind the corporate firewall of doom. When a corporate user looks up how to make my desktop font bigger in their favorite search engine with your existing IT, they probably can't use the results to solve it themselves because your organization has done something stupid like preventing them from changing it. And now they have to log a call to the service desk that you pay for. And the myth that users don't know how to use computers is perpetuated once again. If you really want to, you could invest in a very basic IT support service that a third party provided. But if you hold back the temptation to lock down your corporate IT device, then it will look, feel, and operate like any other consumers. And most any support question can be answered quickly by the individual user using Google and YouTube. For truly corporate applications, make them web apps. We secure stuff on the internet all the time, and there's no reason why you can't secure your corporate applications too. If you really need to, hang it off the internet and use a point-to-point VPN like Tailscale or just plain WireGuard for ingress and egress. Our organizations have become incredibly bound up in supporting increasingly complex constellations of technology that should just be simple commodities. And it's all predicated on the idea that technology is far too complicated for normal people. But separating the muggles from the wizards just doesn't make any sense anymore. Just as my erstwhile arms dealing boss and arms dealers in general perpetuate war by selling weapons, the IT industrial complex exists only to further itself by perpetuating a state that means outside the corporate firewall, technology is easy, and behind it, it is complicated. The key to unlocking it all and making it easy and powerful and useful again is to remove the corporate firewall. That separation, created by the men in white coats and perpetuated by the emergence of the IT industrial complex, has convinced us to invest and then reinvest in largely the same stuff that was prevalent when the first PCs were rolled out. And it's now becoming a burden that corporate IT can't bear. The breadth of technology in corporate IT is vast. And as the pool of stuff we need to know grows wider, the depth of the knowledge we have about it, by necessity, becomes shallower and shallower. And it doesn't matter that the water is only up to our ankles because we're in the middle of the sea and it's thousands of miles in all directions to shore. And that makes the next round of technology foisted upon us harder to absorb into our organizations, and we drift further and further behind. And the truth of it is there are more and more things that users expect to be able to do as table stakes for their computing environment every day. Our ability as corporate IT to vet new and install new applications and services will always be less than the rest of the world's ability to create them. And as we've invested more and more in this huge swathe of tech, we've had less and less money to invest in the one technology capability that can actually make our organization different from any other: software engineering. Creating new ways of doing things is what software engineering does. And in the last 20 years, organizations have hemorrhaged software engineering teams at a time when the product of software engineering, software itself, is, to borrow Mark Andreessen's phrase, eating the world. Now, for some reason, we thought we can outsource it or give it to specialist agencies who will do it for us, and that we benefit from not having to run our own development teams. But why would we think that? There's only one thing that can make our technology better than our competitors' technology, and that's having technology that they don't have. It's not possible if we don't build it ourselves, because they can buy, install, and configure all the same stuff we can, and get the same developers from the same agencies to develop what they can't buy. A software world is a knowledge world, and that means investing in the people that can make the best use of that knowledge. We can only do that if we can reduce our technology spend elsewhere. And the place to start, the thing that has been sucking all our time, money, and attention for over 25 years, is our corporate IT. Thank you. So I guess at this point, I get to ask if there are any questions.
I don't actually see any in the chat. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to drop into the chat? Or, yeah, I don't.
If not, I can give you back 5 minutes of your life.
Thanks very much for that, James, and for your talk there. Just for everybody else listening on the call, I've seen this premise work at Government Digital Service, where the IT was put together with to meet the user's expectations as opposed to the corporate government requirement. And I'm still a big fan of that myself. So thank you very much, James, for your talk.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
No, I don't see any. I'm sorry, I don't see any questions coming up here. I think if that's it,
Okay.
I think we can stop the recording. Thank you very much.
Thank you.